In the midst of chaos and destruction, the simple act of stopping can be the most powerful. A ceasefire is a pause in conflict, a temporary cessation of hostilities. It's a moment to catch our breath, to reassess, and to remember the shared humanity that war often obscures. It's a moment when the guns fall silent, when the bombs stop falling, and when the landscape of destruction is momentarily still. The silence itself becomes a stark reminder of what has been, and a fragile promise of what could be. It's not a peace treaty, a final resolution, but it's often the crucial first step toward ending violence, a chance to de-escalate tensions and begin the long, arduous process of building lasting peace. It's an acknowledgement that dialogue is possible, even amidst deep-seated animosity. Critically, ceasefires allow humanitarian aid to reach civilians, those most vulnerable and often caught in the crossfire. They also create space for negotiations, for diplomats and leaders to come together and seek common ground, to address the root causes of the conflict and forge a path forward. For people trapped in war, living under constant threat, it means a rare moment of safety, a reprieve from the relentless violence that has defined their lives. It's a chance to regroup, to find shelter, to tend to the wounded, and to simply rest, knowing that, for now, the immediate danger has passed. Families can search for loved ones, desperately hoping for reunions, sifting through the rubble of their former lives. They can bury their dead, honoring those lost in the conflict and beginning the long process of grieving, and begin to assess the damage, to understand the scale of the destruction, and to plan for the immense task of rebuilding. Hospitals, often overwhelmed and under-resourced, receive critical supplies, desperately needed medicines and equipment, and aid workers, risking their own lives, can operate more safely, reaching those in need without the constant threat of violence. Without a ceasefire, violence escalates, spiraling out of control, causing more casualties, more displacement, and more suffering for all involved. There are different types of ceasefires, some limited in scope, focusing on specific areas or types of weapons, some broad, encompassing an entire conflict zone. The specific terms are carefully negotiated, often with help from outside mediators, neutral parties who can facilitate communication and build trust. Ultimately, success depends on both sides believing, on a shared understanding, it's in their own best interest to stop fighting, that the potential gains of peace outweigh the perceived advantages of continued conflict. Ceasefires are inherently fragile, vulnerable to mistrust and miscalculation, and can be broken by a single act of violence, a spark that reignites the flames of war. But despite their fragility, they represent hope, a glimmer of light in the darkness of war, a signal that diplomacy might be possible, that even the most intractable conflicts can be resolved through dialogue and compromise. For the international community, a ceasefire is a key moment to encourage dialogue, to bring pressure on warring parties to negotiate in good faith. It tests the commitment of warring parties to seek peace, to put aside their differences and work towards a common future. While it doesn't guarantee peace, it's a necessary condition, a prerequisite for any lasting resolution. Because the absence of a ceasefire guarantees continued conflict, continued suffering, and continued loss. That's why the world's first plea in war, the immediate and urgent call, is often for a ceasefire. A universal call to stop the violence, to give peace a chance, and to alleviate the suffering of those caught in the crossfire. The pause is brief, often measured in days or weeks, not years. But its impact can be profound, offering a glimpse of what a peaceful future might look like. In every conflict, a ceasefire is the first fragile step toward something better, a testament to the enduring human desire for peace. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a deeply rooted and multifaceted issue, characterized by a long and complex history. However, recent events have escalated the situation, bringing it to a critical and dangerous crisis point that demands immediate attention. The current escalation began on October 7, 2023, a date that will be remembered for its profound impact on the region. On that day, Hamas launched a large-scale attack against Israel, breaching borders and initiating a new phase of intense conflict. This attack resulted in a significant number of casualties on both sides, as well as the taking of numerous hostages, further inflaming the already tense situation. In response to the Hamas attack, Israel initiated a major military operation within Gaza, vowing to dismantle Hamas's infrastructure and capabilities. The stated goals of this operation are to neutralize the threat posed by Hamas, and to secure the safe return of all hostages held captive. However, the military operation has had a devastating impact on Gaza, leading to widespread destruction of infrastructure and civilian areas. The intense fighting has left streets in ruins, homes reduced to rubble, and essential services severely disrupted, creating a dire environment for the civilian population. The ongoing conflict has severely disrupted the supply of essential resources, leading to critical shortages of food, clean water, and vital medical supplies. These shortages have created a desperate situation for the over 2 million people residing in Gaza, many of whom have been displaced from their homes and are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. Furthermore, the repercussions of the conflict have extended beyond Gaza, with tensions rising in the West Bank and along the border with Lebanon. This broader instability has fueled concerns about the potential for a wider regional war, drawing in other actors and further destabilizing the already volatile Middle East. In an attempt to de-escalate the conflict and alleviate the suffering, numerous ceasefire proposals have been put forward by various international actors. These proposals typically involve a temporary cessation of hostilities, the exchange of hostages between the warring parties, and the provision of increased humanitarian aid to the affected civilian population. The United States, Egypt, and Qatar have been actively engaged in diplomatic efforts seeking to mediate between Israel and Hamas and to find a path towards a lasting resolution. However, despite these ongoing efforts and the involvement of key international players, a final and comprehensive agreement to end the conflict has so far remained elusive. Both the Israeli government and Hamas maintain firm and often diametrically opposed conditions for a ceasefire, making the prospect of a negotiated settlement extremely challenging. The deep-seated mistrust and conflicting demands between the two sides have created a deadlock in negotiations, making any meaningful compromise exceptionally difficult to achieve. Israel faces a complex and multifaceted situation, grappling with tough choices that carry significant consequences for the region and its own future. At the heart of these choices lies the question of a ceasefire, a decision fraught with strong arguments on both sides, each carrying considerable weight. International pressure is mounting steadily, especially from key allies like the United States, who are urging de-escalation, primarily to protect the vulnerable civilian population caught in the crossfire and to facilitate the entry of desperately needed humanitarian aid into Gaza, providing essential relief. Agreeing to a ceasefire, even temporarily, could significantly ease this mounting international pressure and potentially open doors for further diplomatic solutions. It would also directly address the escalating humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza, offering a chance to alleviate suffering. The plight and uncertain fate of Israeli hostages held captive remains a powerful motivator for many, with many believing that a ceasefire is the only viable pathway to secure their safe return home and reunite them with their families. However, Israel's government firmly insists that its primary and unwavering goal remains the complete and irreversible destruction of Hamas's military capabilities, eliminating the threat it poses. There are widespread fears that a ceasefire at this juncture would simply allow Hamas to regroup, rearm, and rebuild its infrastructure, ultimately enabling them to threaten Israel's security and stability once again in the future. Adding another layer of complexity, political divisions and disagreements within Israel itself further complicate the decision-making process, with some influential leaders even threatening to potentially collapse the current coalition government if any ceasefire deal is perceived as being too lenient or favorable to Hamas. In this highly charged environment, the Prime Minister faces the daunting task of balancing competing international demands and expectations, the desperate pleas of hostage families, and the delicate dynamics of his own political partners within the coalition. The ever-present fear of appearing weak or compromising on national security continues to be a significant and formidable obstacle in the path towards reaching any potential ceasefire agreement. The United States is Israel's closest ally and a key player in ceasefire talks. American diplomats have shuttled between regional leaders seeking common ground for an agreement. The U.S. supports Israel's right to defend itself but is increasingly vocal about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Washington has drafted multi-stage ceasefire proposals, including temporary truces, hostage exchanges, and surges of aid. Critics argue the U.S. either isn't pressuring Israel enough or is undermining its security goals. The U.S. must balance support for Israel, international expectations, and its own interests in regional stability. Its diplomatic leverage could determine whether a ceasefire is reached. Official statements reveal the deep divides over a ceasefire. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu insists the war won't end until Hamas is destroyed and all hostages are returned. This signals reluctance to accept any deal that leaves Hamas in power. Hamas, meanwhile, demands a permanent end to the war, a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and the release of prisoners. They reject temporary truces that could lead to renewed fighting. The U.S., under President Biden, has proposed a phased ceasefire, a truce, partial hostage release, and steps toward a permanent end. The U.S. has also delivered aid directly to Gaza. These positions highlight the fundamental disagreements: security for Israel, survival for Hamas, and compromise from the U.S. The gap between total victory and a complete cessation of aggression remains wide. Public opinion in Israel and Palestine is deeply divided. In Israel, some prioritize defeating Hamas, while others, especially hostage families, demand a deal to bring loved ones home. Many near Gaza support continued military action, fearing a ceasefire will only allow Hamas to rearm. On the Palestinian side, the suffering in Gaza shapes views. Many see a ceasefire as essential, but only if it leads to a political solution and addresses their rights. There's exhaustion and a desperate desire for peace among Gaza's civilians who want an end to violence and a chance to rebuild. While political views are strong, survival and recovery are immediate priorities. These voices, often lost in official rhetoric, highlight the human cost of conflict. The urgent need for lasting peace is felt on both sides. As of July 9, 2025, the situation remains deeply uncertain. Israel is torn between mounting international pressure for a ceasefire and very strong domestic demands for a decisive military victory. The U.S. continues to mediate between the involved parties, balancing its unwavering support for Israel with increasingly urgent calls for humanitarian relief. The core disagreement: Israel wants security and the total defeat of Hamas. Hamas, on the other hand, wants survival and a complete end to the blockade. Until this fundamental gap is successfully bridged, a lasting agreement remains out of reach. The path leading to a ceasefire is fraught with numerous challenges: military, deeply political, and profoundly historical. The entire world waits anxiously, hoping for the peaceful silence of a ceasefire to finally replace the devastating sounds of war.